to play through this week the entire way. It's amazing when you know what you're doing. So, um, as you know, we live we live near a Air Force base, about, I don't know, hour from here. So something that I noticed, um, I don't know, this may get me investigated. Something I noticed uh, back in the fall. Uh, I was sitting in the living room about dusk. Sun was, well, it was a little later than that, because I mean, barely, you could barely see the sun. And I looked out these windows there, and I noticed what I thought was initially a helicopter. And so it kind of concerned me, because the first thought in my mind is, uh, it's a helicopter, it's a police helicopter. I'm out in the middle of the woods. So do I need to protect myself or be ready? Because it was obviously coming my direction. But then as I sat there for a minute, I was going, okay, I'm not hearing any propellers, any rotors, nothing that a helicopter, the sound that a helicopter is going to make. So I sat there for a little bit longer, and all of a sudden I noticed this light got bigger. And the best way I can describe it is, it looked like, you know what a Rosetta Stone is? It looked like a Rosetta Stone, but it looked like a prism, which means that it was more of an LED style light. So I got to sitting there, looking at it longer and longer, and I noticed it would retract and then it would expand. So I went and got out these I got out these extremely, uh, power, like they're very strong binoculars. And when I stepped outside, I noticed there was one straight ahead of me, and then there was another one to the left of me. So I thought, well, maybe those are just really bright planets. Uh, so I Googled, but I didn't see anything where any planets were going to be visible like that. So I looked at it through the binocular, and the best way I can explain it was a cylinder shape, but it was a bright light. So it's like turning on a light and just looking at the light. And when I pulled the binoculars back down, it went back to that round Rosetta Stone prism looking thing. So I thought, well, you're never going to get an answer about that. 2 nights ago, it appears again. And at this time, I noticed it would move, but not fast. It would move rapidly, and then it would sink behind the tree line, and I would have to adjust my position to be able to see it. And then it came back in view, and I got to talking to someone I know who lives up in Maryland, and they sent me a picture of 2 nights before. They took a picture of the very same thing. So I asked them, I said, do you live close to a military base? They said, yeah, about less than an hour, which is exactly the same distance. So my question is, I'm wondering exactly what is the military experimenting with? Because I know the big craze right now is UFOs, and I'm not worried about whether those are real or not. But I do think it's something the Air Force is experimenting with, which brings us into the topic. You sent some articles.
That I did.
So have you got those pulled up?
Yes.
All right, let's take a look at them. And they are. Uh, there's three of them. I want to make certain I get the right one here, because there's kind of an order. It doesn't matter much what the order's. Okay, so probably be the first one. Yes, the first one. Um, it would be the first one, uh, and it is. Go ahead and read it. Just talk to us. Tell us a little bit about it.
Are you talking about the House Democrats launch united effort against an election bill requiring?
No, not that one.
Not that one.
Not that one.
The Chinese warships.
That one.
Okay, so this is not the first time this has happened, but multiple Chinese warships were spotted near Alaska, according to the Coast Guard. They were still in international waters, but they were 124 miles north of the, I'm going to butcher the name, Amchitka. It's Amchitka Pass in the Aleutian Islands. And the fourth ship was spotted about 84 miles north of the state's Amukta Pass. Boy, could they have more complicated names?
These are almost like biblical names.
So they were within the U.S. exclusive economic zone, which extends 200 nautical miles from the U.S. shoreline. These areas are areas where the U.S. has exclusive rights for exploring and using marine resources. So they tracked them, and the Chinese said that they were just out to, I forget the exact excuse they used, but they were just out exploring, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, you're a long way from China, and you know you're right on our doorstep. Like it. Ironically, these things keep occurring. They've been occurring with more frequency, but also you look at the poor debate performance, and then ironically, right after that, they're there. It's a show of force.
It's a show of force, and it goes back to even during the Cold War when you would hear about the Russian MiGs that would fly and basically scrape an American jet just to let them know we're here. And it wasn't until basically Ronald Reagan takes office that, Russia finally realized, well, it wasn't so much Russia realizing it. You had very much the same situation where Reagan knew that communist Russia was not going to be able to withstand the American economy. We didn't have to sink as much money into our military and into our war machines as Russia did. And even with Russia doing that, they could still never keep up because capitalism works. I mean, it's a basic economic idea, but it works. And so we just had more money. And so therefore, by cutting taxes, and that's the reason that people don't understand. I mean, there's more so, yes, the debate performance, I do believe, was, they've been watching for the last 3.5 years. And then we get this debate performance that we got. And not just the American, I mean, we're seeing the meltdown. We're witnessing the meltdown from the media.
Well, I was going to say, it's not only the debate performance, but then you have him go and introduce the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, as Putin. Like, what a slap in the face.
And the look on Zelensky's face.
Yes. It's like a snowball effect. We're just, it's getting worse as we go.
Yeah.
And I think the reality is, like I said, if the conductor of the train or the pilot of the plane or whatever analogy, the captain of the boat,
right,
is not performing, then it's time to reevaluate our decisions. If he was...
Breaking news. Judge dismisses manslaughter case against Alec Baldwin. We all go home. Our day's good now.
Oh, good grief.
We're good. So if you guys were worrying about that, manslaughter charges are gone. They're off the table. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. It's a whole nother topic, but just once again proves if
you've got the right money and know the right people,
and you're on a certain side of a political spectrum, you'll probably come out unscathed.
Well, it just kind of, to be honest, and I think this is a Hail Mary attempt, because as we were talking about the bad performance, so now all of a sudden we're going to get the fact. So it does make me question. A name you're going to hear on this podcast from here on out for a long time is Raymond Reddington. Who is the Raymond Reddington who paid this judge off to get the news off of what's going on with this poor performance?
Yeah, well, the corporate media is quite sinister.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no ifs, ands, buts about it.
Yeah.
We talked about it before, but Nixon's final address, or what he said would have been his farewell address, was a warning against the corporate media, and we've seen how they suppress certain stories, they run certain stories, they pick and choose what kind of information the average person is privy to,
Yeah.
which makes them extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
And so the government's learned to exploit that, like they do with everything. It has become a political extension.
Yeah.
And when you look at, there are several senators who have tried to really nail it down, but they're like, okay, how much communication do you have with them?
Right.
How much does the
Yeah.
White House communicate with these news sources? They always clam up because they realize how it would look if the truth were to come out.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I say that they always have this way of throwing in something that completely, don't pay attention to what's going on over here. Don't worry about this over here.
It's sleight of hand.
Yeah.
It's just like a magic trick.
Yeah.
Watch this hand. You won't see what the other hand is doing.
Yeah. Well, because why is it important to us? First off, why is it important to us that the judge dismisses? No one else would get manslaughter charges dismissed on them by, I guess this is a federal judge, unless there is, like you said, the sleight of hand. Don't pay attention to what's going on, but the problem is that they can try to do that to the American people. But what is really frustrating is the gaslighting that's going on here, because it is trying to make the American people. Because not only do we have a president that looks weak, but as we were discussing before coming on to the podcast, we have a DOJ that is out of hand right now.
Oh yeah, and as a result of illegal court orders, had gained all this information on people of the opposing party. They've become essentially weaponized. And, like I've always talked about, the biggest thing in law enforcement is equal dispensation of the law. You should be treated the same regardless of your socioeconomic status, your race, your gender. None of that should matter. You commit a crime, you get treated, you meet the same form of punishment. And we've really gone off the rails in that respect because, a blind person could see what's going on with the fact that, the Hunter Biden laptop and all these other Hillary's email scandal. There's no prosecutions, but then how many felony charges did they, dig up against Trump? It was like 153 or something. It was something ridiculous.
153, but I think wasn't he found guilty on 34, something like that?
The whole thing stinks.
I think it was 34, and that 34. Everything about this right now says, it says that it is election interference, and I just saw the other day.
Well,
actually,
the news sat on the Hunter laptop story because they were afraid it would affect Biden's election. And which we do remember because it was the debate in October that they had when that hit the news, and I was in Nashville when that debate happened, and the debate was in Nashville, and there was the guy that came on. I don't remember his name. He came on before the debate and was talking about the laptop, but I noticed that there was. Let me see if I can pull up the name. Let me see if I can't pull this name up real quick. Give me just a second, because the name is right there, and I was trying to remember. But there was another
there was another conservative that was just arrested, and they are weaponizing the DOJ against anyone who just disagrees. They don't. I don't even think they have to be Trump supporters at this point. They just have to disagree.
Yeah, any kind of dissent earns you a special spot.
Well, and it goes back to the art of war. You play on your enemy's weaknesses, and then you stand back and you watch as the enemy begins to basically turn on each other, and that is what they're trying to do. That they really are trying to get us to self-implode. And the thing that we've seen, I mean, if you watch anything, I mean, if you watch a lot of stuff on Netflix or any of the streaming platforms, one of the things that you're starting to see, and just pay attention to it, how much anti-Christian, and it's some of it, amazingly enough, it's not even altogether anti-Christian, it's just anti-faith and anti-religion that they are promoting. And they are just blatantly being anti-faith, because we've said from this podcast on several occasions, if you can attack the faith of a society, you can start to rip away at the fabric of that society much more easy.
Yeah, well, I mean, that if you look at Marx's Communist Manifesto, that's one of the first things is to dismantle the religion. Once that's done, then it's much easier to attack people, and they don't have a leg to stand on.
No, you're right, and that is what people don't seem to grasp is that communism is, in fact, I was having this conversation. It is, in fact, atheism, and I was having this conversation yesterday, I believe it was, and one of the things that you quickly, or that is scary. We talked about this on a podcast a long time ago, probably over a year ago now, and we talked about the satanic panic. And back in the 70s, 80s, and up through the 90s, you had a lot of churches that were so they were hyper focused, if I can use that word, on backward masking of albums and all of the stuff that went on in the heavy metal world and different things. But now we're at a point where they weren't necessarily wrong with everything they said, but they were so hyper focused that they discredited themselves. And now what's happened is, I think a lot of church leaders, especially my age, our age, have almost become shy and withdrawn to the fact of standing up and actually calling out what is going on that truly is Satanism, and that is the philosophy that drove the communist regimes. And a lot of people died in the wake of that because life means nothing to them.
Yeah, well, there's a plethora of historical examples, but McCarthy, when he was hunting for pinkos for communist sympathizers in the U.S. government, there undoubtedly were some, but it almost came to his discredit because people are like, surely not all these people are communists.
Yeah.
And so even if he had hit the nail right on the head with some of them, he was still discredited in the end. Obviously there were, because if you look at elements of our government now, there's no ifs, ands, buts about it. There are elements of communist or Marxist that remain. Some of them have been in there for 40 years, or more. But that's the other way that the media has become really weaponized is, they constantly berate things like that or print these articles making you look like you're paranoid and really ruining your credibility.
Yeah.
So the average person looks at it and goes, no, there's no way this could be true.
Yeah.
But the truth is probably far more sinister than any of us realize.
Well, you can go back to a lot of TV shows that what they would do with church leaders, preachers, etc. What they would do is they would depict that person as somebody who was disheveled, unkept, low hygiene, clothes were dirty, and the point of that was to discredit. And what a lot of people don't understand is when things like that start, the whole point of that, the whole concept of that is we saw it in the Third Reich, we've seen it in China, we've seen it in Russia. As they begin, what they're doing is they're dehumanizing.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It starts the process of losing the value of that person.
Yeah.
And so it becomes much easier to do horrific things when you don't value something.
Well, you were a police officer, and you probably can back this up. But what I've heard is that a lot of times, if a person is getting ready to be killed, if they can get the person who's going to kill them to acknowledge them, that can...
Well, so it's much harder for human beings if they're, let's say, a somewhat normal functioning human being. It's hard to look in another human being's eyes and know that you're about to take their life, or you could. There's something that God built into you where you don't want to do that. That's why you'll see crimes where they'll put a pillow over their face, or they'll do something because they don't want to look at them.
Yeah.
They need to disassociate that person from the crime.
Well, let me ask you this, because you were in the military as well, and I know I've heard different people that, like Vietnam era, that they would say that when they were being trained, if you're approaching an enemy soldier, don't look them in the eye. Look them in the body mass, because if you look them in the eye, you will be less likely to take their life if you need to.
I never got any of that, but there was a lot of desensitization of human life.
Okay, and that's
like
what we're...
A lot of the marching cadences were, I won't repeat them on here because they're not the most appropriate for this podcast, especially with it being attached to the church. But
well, you're not the first person I've actually heard talk about those cadences.
And it's hard to explain, but when you realize that it's kill or be killed, it does change your mentality. But, like my grandpa was a Marine in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
He stormed the beaches in the South Pacific and was at like the Battle of Bougainville. He was at some big battles in World War II. And he told me that before they shipped out, they showed him videos of the Japanese bayoneting infants.
Right.
And things that he said that you had such a fervent hatred that, they really tried to
and those were probably isolated incidences.
And really tried to get you to not think about it.
Yeah.
And, as a child, I think I was around the second grade, because we talked about World War II in school. And I asked my grandpa, did you ever shoot anybody? And I don't think I said it exactly like that. I asked him, had you ever killed anyone? And he just stared off in the distance. He said, I fired a lot of shots, and I'd like to think I didn't hit what I was aiming at.
Yeah.
Which, meant Grandpa did, and he didn't want to talk about it. And I never brought it up again.
Yeah.
He had nightmares for over 50 years. When I was a kid in the 90s, I'd wake up and my grandpa would be sitting on their front porch. They had one of those, the big swings, and he'd just be sitting there looking out at the lake.
Wow.
My grandma said that he'd wake up almost every night. She said when he first came back, it was so bad. Like, and she said he didn't talk for almost a year. Like it just.
Well, I know my dad has a really good friend who was a Korean veteran. Of course, he's already passed away. He was a Korean veteran, and his wife said the same thing. As a matter of fact, their last name was Reagan, not the president. And he was very much that way. In fact, she said that they'd be driving down the road, and he would pull the car over, and he would just walk for sometimes an hour or better. And then he would get back in the car, and then they would go on. And she said, I would ask him, what's going on? And he would just shut down. And one day, my dad, because my dad was, as a younger man, his primary ministry was evangelist. And if you don't know what that is, that's a minister who travels around and preaches at other churches. And he just happened to be preaching at that particular church. Well, he knew my dad was a Vietnam veteran. So one day they were at the house, and I guess she had went out somewhere or something, but he was not aware she was in the house. And he opened up to my dad and just started talking to my dad about all the stuff that had happened. And afterwards she told my dad, she said, I never knew that. And said he's just shut down. Well, we're talking years before. I mean, we're talking 70s when PTSD wasn't really even a word. They knew that soldiers beginning with, because everything changed at World War One. And they knew that soldiers dealt with that kind of stuff, but they didn't understand to what level.
Yeah, they didn't understand the psychology of the physiology. I mean, it's gone by many different names. You had, oh gosh, what was it?
I know the Air Force called it whirly something, or
battle fatigue and,
yeah,
shell shock, and all these other various names. It's all the same.
Yeah,
the same issue, just different names.
Well, and we know that it it extended way back before World War One, and we can even know that from the Bible, because if you go back and you read Judges chapter 17, which I call probably the most violent chapter in the entire Bible, and I'm not and just to give you a synopsis of it, it's a man who not his wife, but the Bible would call her concubine. That's politically incorrect for you. I apologize, but that's what she's called. They go into a town, and she is sexually assaulted the entire night until she dies, and then he sends fragments of her to the 12 tribes of Israel. It causes a civil war, and they about wipe out the entire tribe of Benjamin. And after they do that, after they wipe out the entire tribe of Benjamin, the Bible says that the men lamented their decision. And what it is it's PTSD is what they're feeling. So we know that has always been attached to combat.
Yeah, I went back and looked at some of the terms. They had combat stress, battle fatigue, shell shock. There's railway spine. I've never heard
that. I've never heard that one at all.
Apparently there were a whole bunch of terms, but going back, of course I'm not going to read the whole article, but going back to 2100 BC, apparently they had terms back then as well.
Oh, they did.
Let's see if I can glance through real quick and see what it says. But
we are going to give you a history lesson on today's episode, boys and girls. You will learn.
You probably don't even care. But apparently, let's see.
If you had nothing better else to do today, well, you do now. You will be able to impress all of your friends with the terms that were used over the centuries for PTSD.
Okay, so, the reason we hadn't heard of railway spine is because that was an old term around the Industrial Revolution.
Well, that's what I was wondering. I mean, it's kind of like, you kind of seem like Iron Man. I got railway spine and rock ribs.
Yeah.
That's kind of, that doesn't sound like a bad one. I got a railway spine. That means I'm strong. I'm good to go.
And so I guess they have alluded to the fact that in the Epic of Gilgamesh, when the title character loses his friend, and God grief these names today, Enkidu, He experiences symptoms of intense grief and panic and believes that he too must die. Like,
Yeah, so it's PTSD.
yeah. So I think for a majority of humanity, when they've been exposed to horrific things, like, okay, I had to go on a deceased toddler one time.
Mm-hmm.
Not the only time I've seen a deceased child, but
Yeah.
like that one for good grief, I don't know, months after, I would get up in the middle of the night and go check on my kids.
Right.
And Erica was like, look, you've got to stop. And I'm like, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
Because all I would see was that over and over again.
No, I worked in the funeral business, and they told me when I first started, they said that was going to be the top one that you would not be able to shake. And one of the very first things I had to do was and I'll never forget. I took a casket, and it literally wasn't much bigger than a shoebox to put the infant's body in. So I mean that does happen, but kind of pull us back a little bit from the brink here. I do think that another thing that we've kind of talked about is the spiritual awakening that I do believe is starting to occur. And right now, going back on topic, we're talking about the fact that everyone's having a meltdown. The world's seeing the weakness of Joe Biden, right? This is not an attack Joe Biden and promote Donald Trump. That's not what this is. I mean, if you're not listening to it, then you're just choosing to not stay aware. If you have interest in this country and the future of this country, you want to stay aware. I mean, one of the things that keeps our freedom is the fact that we are a political people. But there are things that I'm starting to see, and I'm not so sure. I was thinking about this the other day. Everybody's talking about certain things that are going on, such as, and the Cook Political Report, which I don't think is actually a conservative, but it could be. Anyway, the Cook Political Report released, they said, today we're making 6 changes to our electoral college ratings. So these states are important, right? These are typically toss-up states. Well, some of them aren't. But they're, so Arizona, toss-up, leans Republican. Georgia, toss-up, lean Republican. Minnesota, likely Democrat, leans Democrat. Nebraska, likely Democrat, lean Democrat. New Hampshire, likely Democrat to lean Democrat. And Nevada, toss-up to lean Republican. Now, I mention those states because every one of those states right now are in play in this upcoming election. And here's kind of what I thought the other day. I don't know if changing this is my prayer, okay? This is my prayer, not because I'm rock ribbed. I'll use that, right? What was the other Taylor something spine? Railway spine Republican. I'm not a railway spine Republican, but I do pray that this is what's going on. That it may not be about the Democrats changing who they're choosing to run, as much as we're starting to see a spiritual awakening and a movement back to traditional values that's causing these states to be in play.
I mean, ultimately, that would be the best case scenario.
Yeah.
You cannot approach life from the Christian perspective and be okay with some of the things that party does. It just simply doesn't align. And if you believe that it does, you're only kidding yourself.
Yeah.
The hot button topics like abortion, you cannot look at that from a biblical point of view and say that that's okay. Yeah. And so, I mean, there's a multitude of issues where the current administration has really dropped the ball. The border, the economy. I mean, you can just go down the list, and people, I think, are finally getting fed up with it. People who aren't political are looking at it and going, "Look, I have to survive.
Yeah.
Like I can't afford the gasoline and the groceries and my rent and
Yeah.
everything else." We talked about mortgage rates are more than double what they were 4 years ago. It's making it impossible for those who are not ultra wealthy
Yeah.
to have a comfortable living. Can you survive? Likely, but it's not the same comfort level that Americans are used to.
Yeah.
They're starting to feel the squeeze, and they're looking at it going, "Look, you've had 4 years to straighten this out."
Yeah. And we're 6 months out of an election. Now you're telling us you're going to fix it?
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's what politicians do. For Pete's sake, you were a senator for the better part of 40 years or something. I mean, something ridiculous. Like, you've had how much time to get things done? But I'll get it done now. Like, no.
Well, it reminds me of one time when I was in college, and I procrastinated and I procrastinated and I procrastinated, and I had a paper to write. But that class was not on the top of my priority list. So I waited until the morning of to write the paper. And professor called me into his office. He said, "Do you want me to tell you what I think, what grade I'm going to give you?" And I was thinking he was going to say F. He just threw it in the trash. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing that it's like, no, you're at the morning of, and now you're trying to write the paper.
Yeah, I mean, you've had 4 years to make these differences, and you failed miserably. And it's not an attack directly on the sitting president. It's it's the government in general. You guys have just twiddled your thumbs, and we're not. If you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards,
Yeah.
and we're certainly not moving forward.
Yeah.
I steer away from the word crisis because I think it's so overused. We have a climate crisis. We have this crisis. We have that crisis.
Never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah, exactly. But I will say that I think the border is a crisis.
Absolutely.
I saw a funny video. Now, I don't know if it's satire or if it was legitimate, but it was a guy wearing a Biden-Harris shirt, and the guy was talking to him, and he's like, "So you believe we should have open borders?" And he's like, "Yes, anybody can come here." And so he's like, "Okay, well, I picked up 3 Hondurans down at Home Depot. They're going to stay with you." And the guy starts getting really irate. And it's like, well, I mean, if it's okay, then... And he's like, "I don't know them." I'm like, that's the entire point.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. I believe it was last year or year before. I could probably pull up the numbers real quick. But they had caught 20,000 Chinese nationals trying to come through.
That's an invasion force.
And if you look at a large number of the people who are coming here, they're military-aged men. Now, they could be looking for work.
Yeah.
Okay? They need to provide for their families, and they don't have a chance where they're from. And so they're coming here because we are still seen as the land of opportunity.
Right.
But what if they have an ulterior motive? Or what if they have hatred for this country in their heart?
We need to know that.
Yes. So I am not opposed to people coming to this country. What I'm opposed to is just opening the floodgate and letting everybody through, and not knowing. I mean, how many terrorists have we let through?
Yeah.
Either knowingly or unknowingly. With the drug cartels and the other things that are going on. I mean, human trafficking, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking. I mean, the scenarios are endless, and we have a lot of enemies.
Yeah.
The simple reality is you cannot just leave it completely unchecked. Would you want to get on an airplane? Now, I'm not saying the TSA does a great job, okay? I'm just going to throw that out there. But would you want to get on an airplane or go into a place where they didn't have metal detectors, or they weren't at least trying to ensure that somebody wasn't going to bring the plane down? It's completely insane to me to just open it completely up, and whoever wants to come can come. Well, you do understand there's people who want to do you harm.
Yeah.
The world is not necessarily a friendly place.
No. And that is the danger with what we're seeing as we open the podcast up today with China and Russia coming as close, China specifically coming as close to Alaska. I mean, we can't forget, Alaska was attacked during World War II. We always hear about Pearl Harbor, but so was Alaska. Alaska, I mean, we go back to Seward's Folly and the Lincoln administration when they ridiculed him for purchasing Alaska for as cheap as he did, only to find out that it was rich in oil. At that time, I don't think he thought Russia was going to attack and be a problem, but it certainly could have been, especially during the Cold War.
Yeah, well, and that kind of segues into the other article that I sent you, where U.S. intelligence learned of a plot to assassinate the CEO of a German arms manufacturer that was perpetrated by the Russians. I mean, we're literally playing out. So here's the thing. Kind of backtrack just a tiny bit. Putin wants to rebuild. He wants to relive the glory days of the Soviet Union. He's a former KGB agent. To him, he wants to restore that. I mean, that's his ultimate goal. And so, what we're seeing is basically the Cold War playing out again, but this time we don't have a Reagan.
Right.
We've got somebody who is, honestly, I think it's abuse what they're doing to him. I think that while like I said, I've said this before, I don't agree with his lifestyle. I don't agree with the decisions he's made. But at this point in his life, he needs to enjoy his time. He doesn't need to be in the most high-stress job. So the alleged plot, going back to the assassination, the alleged plot targeted Armin Papiger, the chief executive of Rheinmetall AG, Europe's largest producer of ammunition, whose company makes 155 millimeter artillery rounds for Ukraine, and plans to open several plants inside the country to produce both ammunition and armored vehicles, including the Lynx infantry fighting vehicle. U.S. intelligence agencies discovered the plan to go after Papiger earlier this year and informed the German government. And so apparently they foiled the plot.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a spy novel,
Well, it's like you said. I mean, it really is. That was when was that? Obama mocked Romney, and he said the '80s called and they want their Cold War back. And then they mocked before that. They mocked Sarah Palin because, and you mentioned it before coming on here. She had made the mention, "I can see Russia," and then I think it was John McCain who said, "I saw Putin," and he's got. Someone said something about dollar signs in his eyes, and he said, "I saw Putin, and he's got the hammer and sickle in his eyes." I mean, does he want the old Soviet Union back? I don't know, because it didn't work, but he certainly wants that level of power and world dominance. He certainly wants that. The problem is that Zelensky and Ukraine are not standing between him and that. We are arming Ukraine. And I fear that is going to, no pun intended, blow up in our face.
Well, how many times has it in the past?
Yeah. Afghanistan, Vietnam.
Mujahideen.
Yeah.
I mean, every time we play world police, it typically comes back to bite us.
Yeah.
There are very few times where it actually works out in our favor.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pattern we've repeated ad nauseum.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most existential threat to the U.S. is probably China.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know. I feel like at this point, maybe not the Middle East. We've kind of pulled back. Now, the war in Israel could potentially cause that to spark up, but by and large, I think China, and now that China and Russia are allied, and they're really seeming to strengthen their alliance, I think that makes them much more, makes them a much greater adversary.
Yeah.
Because Russia, as it stands, I mean, do they have some decent technology? Yes, but what they lack, China makes up for in numbers.
Yeah, yeah, and the thing is, I mean, you've always had the Axis powers, going back to World War I and World War II, and they know that they can't, just like the United States knows that we would not be able to defeat our enemies just by ourselves, short of nuclear power. And first off, I mean, we all know wars typically start off economically. That you're always going to try to hit the economy, the real estate, whatever you can before the first bullet ever gets shot. But the thing is, yes, like you said, I mean, they are forming their alliances. I mean, that's why Iran became known as Iran and no longer Persia. It was the land of the Aryan, because they were forming an alliance with the Germans. So you have to have. I mean, even Jesus said, when one king comes and the other king realizes he cannot overtake the attacking king, what does he do? He goes and talks terms of peace or alliance with that king. It's just the way of the world.
Yeah. There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
We're just repeating the same process.
Yeah.
It's just now on a larger scale.
Yeah.
And with more advanced weapons.
Mm-hmm.
But human beings and politics have not changed.
No.
That's all the same. The players may change, but the game hasn't.
Right. And if you came to this podcast expecting me to say who Gog and Magog is, I have no idea. But what I do know is right now Russia is a geopolitical threat to not just the United States, but to the world. And we've got to have somebody sitting in the White House who has the ability and the cognizance to let our enemies know we're not going to surrender.
Well, so excuse me. One of the things I love that Trump did is when he had a sit down, it was him and Mike Pompeo.
Yeah.
They sat down with the head of the Taliban, with Taliban leadership. And he said, I want out of Afghanistan. And, they had a translator there. And he said, look, I want out, but it's going to be controlled.
Yeah.
And so Trump looked right at the leader of the Taliban, and of course the translators having to translate all this, and said, if one hair is harmed on an American's head, I'm going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And the translator's looking at him like, and he's like, tell him. So he tells him, and then he pulls a picture out of his pocket and unfolds it, and it's a picture of the guy's house, a satellite image of the guy's house.
Yeah.
And for 18 months, we didn't lose a single life.
Right.
We had somebody and they believed it,
Mm-hmm.
because I truly believe that he would have.
I think he's the guy, yeah. He'd have backed his words up.
But the thing is, when you have a weak defense or you have a weak leader, there are people who will exploit that. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
All it does is embolden those who do not share your ideals or interests.
Yeah.
And we're what's that noise?
I don't know.
It sounds like a weed eater.
That's something.
We're definitely in that position at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that is what's going on. I mean, we're just in a completely different time, and we are going to say this has been a great exchange, and we are glad that you came by and dropped through, and we hope to see you again next week. And just a lot of stuff going on. And anyway, Michael.
Well, don't worry about those events that you can't change.
Yeah.
Okay, like geopolitics, we have no control over.
Right.
What you do have
Right.
control over is your own life, your own outlook. Don't worry about tomorrow because that deprives today of its happiness.
That's right.
Keep your faith and read the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, and you can make it through anything. And we all know that this has to come to pass. I'm not saying that this is the end of times, but every generation's believed that they're in the end times.
Yeah.
I can tell you this: we're a day closer.
Yeah.
So just keep reading.
All right. Thank you again, and we will see you next week. Until then, be blessed and join the exchange.